Introduction to Agile Project Management. Agile project management came about even before the mid-90s, but it really became popular in the mid-90s. And it came about because of software engineers and developers. They felt like that the traditional or waterfall approach to project management was not appropriate, and it was hard to work with. And they developed that. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the development of it. But somewhere around 2001, there was a group of guys that got together, and about 17 of them that got together, and they codified the Agile approach, because at that time there were many different Agile methods being developed. And they kind of summarized some of the integral details of all of them together to come up with the Agile Manifesto and the 12 Principles of Agile. Introduce the session by talking about waterfall, traditional, predictive type of project management. I use those terms synonymously. PMBOK 6th edition is what the current PMP exam is part of what it's based on. The actual exam itself is based on the exam content outline. And it refers to 10 different contemporary project management books for the exam questions. And the 6th edition of the PMBOK Guide is one of those books. In today's current exam environment, the 6th edition of the PMBOK Guide, which is process-based, and it's more of a waterfall predictive traditional approach, is what the exam is based on. Looking at the next slide, the 6th edition of the PMBOK Guide. The 6th edition, or 7th edition of the PMBOK Guide. The 7th edition of the PMBOK Guide is based on the 12 principles. Those 12 principles replace the process groups of the 6th edition. The 6th edition process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. It replaces those 6 initial process groups. It also replaces the 8 domains, the 8 knowledge areas. The 8 knowledge areas such as integration, scope, schedule, cost, planning, and it replaces those with the 8 domains. And there are no processes specified in the 7th edition of the PMBOK Guide. Instead, they have put online what's called the Standards Plus. And this is an online type of access, and it does have a lot of the processes that we see in the 6th edition of the PMBOK Guide. That's a question I get quite often, and I just thought that would be appropriate to share that with you. As a project manager or a project team, which is in Agile, you have a lot of different balls in the air at one time. You're working with cost, schedule, scope, resources, quality, risks, stakeholders, changes, and many more things. You have a difficult time then to actually balance all these items at one time. And a project manager has to be knowledgeable of what's going on within their project. If they are not, guess what? Their project is most likely going to fail, and it will not be successful. Just consider that as we're talking through these slides today. The types of projects that we typically talk about in everyday life are predictive, iterative, incremental, and agile. Now, our focus today is going to be on the agile approach, but this agile approach is also iterative and incremental. All of these we can lump together under agile, because agile is generally considered to be iterative as well as incremental. Let's get with it. To look at this, and you'll understand better why iterative and incremental are wrapped under the Agile umbrella. With an iterative approach, you are trying different ideas to clarify scope, approach, and the scope requirements. For example, as a customer, I need a method to capture ideas that might change. Iteratively, we think about the blackboard, or in this case, a green board that you write on, or a notepad and a pencil. You feedback and adapt. It's a feedback and adapt approach. So you get feedback, you adapt, and then you move on to the next, and then you have the same thing, feedback and adapt. You move on to the keyboard, and then finally you end up with a smartphone or something of that nature that you're going to be capturing the information on. But look at incremental. In incremental, you are progressively developing the features and the functions that are needed. You are progressively developing those features and those functions. You have a vision of a house in your mind. You want to build a house. So you start off with it, and then once again you have feedback and adapt. You get the walls started. You get the house framed in. You get the house closed in, and then you finish the house. It's incrementally delivered. That would be typical of Agile. Both of these are actually typical of Agile. You see, when we start off with Agile, we start off with a thought. We start off with a vision of what this is going to look like. And then we start developing that vision. In Agile, the scope is always done iteratively, always. It is very variable. It's always done iteratively. I have a thought, but I'm going to develop that thought as I move through the project. The schedule in Agile is generally fixed. What do I mean by that? For example, in Agile, you produce the work in iterations. A lot of times those iterations are time boxed, meaning I have to have that iteration complete by such and such a date. And we'll talk more about that, but that would be a fixed type of a schedule. Then I look at the cost. The cost in Agile may also be fixed. And when I say fixed, I mean, let's take, for example, that I can spend $10,000 a month on this project. If I spend $10,000 and I'm only halfway through the month, I'm done with that project for the month. Then I can pick back up on that the next month and spend another $10,000. So the cost would be fixed. On the other hand, if I look at the traditional approach, waterfall, and you look at it, you have your scope is fixed, you have a defined scope, and then you have a plan for the schedule, and you have a plan for the cost. Scope in Agile is estimated, the product vision, and then your user stories, and it is released iteratively. The schedule is fixed, iteration length. The cost is fixed, periodic budget. And then you deliver value frequently. You see, Agile is all about getting value into the hands of the customer as quick as possible. And then changes in Agile are always welcome. That would be the traditional and the Agile approach there in comparison. The Agile Manifesto that I mentioned earlier. These are the gentlemen here that met sometime in 2001, and they codified the approach to Agile, pull all the methods together, the commonalities, and then they developed this Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles of Agile. Think about this. The manifesto says we are more concerned, or we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. In a traditional environment, we have lots of processes, we have lots of tools. We are also valuing working software over comprehensive documentation. In the traditional approach, we have documentation, customer collaboration, over contract negotiation. In Agile, it's all about the customer. The customer may even be part of the team. They're constantly involved in the project. In traditional, they're involved at certain key points in time when we need them to be involved. Agile, you're responding to change over following a plan. In traditional, we have a project management plan. In Agile, our planning is minimal. Minimal planning with very little documentation. These are the gentlemen here that I mentioned earlier. Next, think about it this way. In today's environment, I've taken the liberty of changing software, delivering software, working software over a working deliverable. I took that liberty today because it's more than software development today. There are a lot of projects that should take an agile approach. You don't have a well-defined scope. You're not quite sure of what's going to be involved in it. For example, developing a software package or developing a book, writing a book, developing a training program, maybe even filling in a patio or building a patio where you have the vision in your mind, but you're not quite sure how to deal with that, what you want as the end result. You develop it iteratively and incrementally. That would be clarified then by saying a working deliverable over comprehensive documentation. It is applicable to more than software. Here are the 12 principles of Agile. Those 17 guys developed these 12 principles, which give you a little bit more value than the manifest, a little bit more detail. I'm not going to read this, but I am going to call out some items here that we need to talk about. So our highest priority, satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery. It's all about the customer. It's all about getting value in the hands of the customer as soon as possible. Changes are welcome. You see, we have smaller iterations. Generally, an iteration is going to last anywhere from a week to 8 weeks, somewhere in that time frame. And look at it this way, you don't have much invested at that point in time. So you work on an iteration, and at the end of that iteration, you're going to do a retrospective, which is a review of how it went and what you can improve. And you're going to take then those improvements and you're going to incorporate those in the next iteration. The cost of the changes is not as great as if you've been working on something for 6 months and then all of a sudden you want to make a major change to it, a structural change, then that could be very costly. It's a different scenario. It's a different type of a project. Deliver working software frequently. Deliver working software. Deliver actually working deliverables frequently. Not only software, but other types of deliverables as well. Work together daily throughout the project. You see, in an Agile project, typically the team is self-organized. The team actually determines what is going to be done. They determine who's going to do it. They make all decisions on the project itself. Everything is team-based, team-oriented. They work together, part of the team. People work together. In Agile project management, the next one, line item number 5, build projects around motivated individuals. You see, in Agile, I have to have a T-shaped skill. That means that I have to have the breadth of knowledge as well as the depth of knowledge. Generalist, in other words. They are generalists. They have many different skills. They have many different skills. They don't have a single skill, but they're able to do many different tasks. Face-to-face versus conversation. Face-to-face conversation is the most efficient, most effective, and I think you all know that. But you also know that in today's environment that we do things virtually a lot more often, or a lot of the times when we can't do it face to face. While working together face to face is the best approach, sometimes today we just can't do that. But osmotic communications is a big factor in a project. Listening, being in the same room with someone, listening and hearing what's going on and seeing what's going on with regards to the project. That's a very important aspect of project management, especially in Agile project management. Working software or a working deliverable is the measure of progress. Sustainable development. You know, if you are able to sustain your development, that is key. You can't start on a project and be working 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. You just can't do that. That's not sustainable. You want to make sure that you're sustainable in your development. Continuous attention, technical excellence, and good design. Hey, that's very important, isn't it? I love this next one. Item number 10, maximizing the amount of work not done. In other words, we should adapt this for everything we do. We want to minimize the noise that sometimes creeps in when we're doing work. We want to minimize that. We want to maximize our efficiency and do the work that needs to be done, and all the extraneous items, just push those to the outside and don't even focus on those or do those. We talked about a project team in Agile, self-organized team. They are the drivers. You do not have a project manager. And then at regular intervals, they reflect on how to become more effective. That's done generally at the end of each iteration when you do your retrospective. Let's go down this just to make sure that I've covered everything. But it's team-led. Agile projects are based on a product vision and a user story. We create a backlog of items to be completed. These are the tasks that you have to complete within an iteration. We'll look at that in just a moment. The focus is to deliver value to the customer as soon as possible. And we do that through small incremental releases. You see, at the end of each iteration, we're going to be releasing value to the customer. Spikes. A lot of times we don't know just quite how to do something. Maybe we've never done it before. We do it really quick. We test it. This also works well with risk that you're involved with in Agile. But you'll do a spike. You'll go off and do something. You'll do it really quick. And just to see what the best way to approach it is. And if you have unknowns associated there, that will help clarify it and help you to make the decision on the best way to go. This is key. Customer is continuously involved in the project. Continuously involved in the project. Frequent meetings. Actually, we have daily stand-up meetings. This is a Scrum approach. Scrum is an Agile method, but this is a Scrum approach. Daily stand-up meetings, and we discuss 3 things in that meeting. They are 15-minute or less meetings. The team all comes together, and they all come prepared to talk about what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do today, and what my impediments are. Those 3 things. You don't try to solve issues, but you're trying to capture the work that's being done and is where their blockers are, or whatever it may be. If you have issues that you need to work, then you'd pull together those people that you need to discuss those issues in a different meeting, and you'd approach it that way rather than tying the whole team up. Think about it this way. The team is who's doing the work, right? And if they're in a meeting, they're not doing work. And we want our teams focused on doing work. Changes are welcome. Changes are welcome. Problems are solved and decisions are made by the team itself. Some other key elements. Vision statement or product vision. That provides the business need for the project. User story describes what the project is to deliver. An iteration delivers value to the customer. A sprint, sprints are often referred to as iterations. They're interchangeable. They're synonymous. Sprint is more of a Scrum term, where iteration is more of a general term, but they are the same thing. I talked about time-boxed iteration. In other words, I have a list of items that have to be completed within this iteration. They have to be completed on such and such a date, either a 1 to 8 week period of time usually. Backlog. Backlog is a prioritized list of the tasks that are to be completed. Iteration planning. In Agile, we do some planning. Iteration planning is a brief planning session that we plan how we're going to execute that iteration. That would, of course, be done by the team. Release plan. We'll look at one here in just a moment, but that defines when usable sets of the deliverable will be delivered. Then we have the retrospective, which is basically a lessons learned. We look back over the iteration. We are trying to determine areas that we can improve, and sometimes we might implement those changes in the next iteration or in a future iteration at least. It's continuous improvement, Kanzai. Let's look at some of these factors that we've been talking about here, just to give you some examples. The product vision. The product vision, that's the first stage in the Agile project. It's an elevator pitch, a quick summary that's used to basically communicate what your project is all about and the goals of it. Here's a template that you can use to develop your product vision. First of all, we are developing this product for, and then that would be the target customer. Who are we developing it for? Is it for sales? Is it for consumers? Is it for a customer? Exactly what is it for? To respond to the following need. How does it respond to that need that the customer has identified? The product responds to those needs by providing the following. What is this project going to provide? What are the deliverables? The customer will buy this product because. There's a couple of things in that aspect. Number one is, why do they want it? Why will they buy it? How are you satisfying their need? And then, how is this better than perhaps a competitor? Here's an example. 4. We are developing this product for our bank customers. They will be able to view their online account status using the online banking application, which will provide them anytime access to their account and allow them to access banking features online. This application will allow 24-hour banking services as compared to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. service allowed by comparable banks. That's the product vision. Then we have epic story. I don't want to get into this too much. We just don't have time. But sometimes a project is scaled. And we start off with a scaling of the project because it's huge. We will have different levels of it. And an epic story would be like the highest level of it. And then it would break down into the various iterations and backlogs below that. The epic story here would be, as a bank customer, I want to view my statement balance online anytime I want to see my account balance, transfer money, and pay bills. It's always written from the customer's perspective. Here's a user story. User stories are just simple sentences, and they're structured as follows. As a, that's who we are building it for. In other words, as a bank customer, given the previous example, what is it they are trying to achieve? What is the problem that needs solving? That would be a user story approach, how you would write a user story. Here are some examples. As the account owner, I want to display overview of account once logged in. Pretty simple, isn't it? As the account owner, I want to see the total funds available so I can understand my financial position. And so you write those user stories appropriately. Here would be what we call a backlog. An iteration has a backlog, and that backlog is in priority order, and it has all the user stories listed in it, and it will tell us exactly what we're going to be doing in that iteration. You can see I have the user stories written here, and then I have a priority associated with them. The priority is based on what will give the customer the most value the soonest. And I prioritize those in that order. There are some other aspects to Agile, such as estimating. There are different estimating techniques that are obviously going to be different than a predictive approach because it's hard to measure in Agile. We measure things differently. Retrospective, lessons learned. We look back over an Agile after an iteration is completed. We review it. We review the deliverable. We make determinations on what we need to improve, and then we improve it in the next iteration. Information radiator. In a traditional environment, we do our reports. We'll have our cost performance report, our schedule performance, report, all these different types of reports in a traditional approach. But in Agile, we have what's called this information radiator. And it will contain things such as a burn down chart, burn up chart. We'll look at some of those in a minute. But it's important to know that information radiator, we don't distribute reports. This information radiator will be posted in a very visible, high visible area that everyone can see and everyone can access it to see how the project is progressing. Scrum Master, Coach, Servant Leaders. In Agile, we do not have a project manager, but we do have what's called a Scrum Master for Scrum, a coach, or a servant leader. And these people support the team. They may be working on the impediments. They may be answering questions about how to do things in the Agile environment. But they're there to support the team, not to direct the team. Burn down chart reports work that remains to be done. Burn up reports work that has been completed. We talked about T-shaped skills, a generalist with multiple skills. And the team always has to commit to doing an iteration. Here are some of the estimating techniques that are used in Agile. And most of them are very subjective. And you have t-shirt sizing, for example, where you will size how long it will take to do an iteration or an activity within the backlog. Velocity is something that's gained over time. For example, how many iterations can you do in a week or in 2 weeks, or how many stories can you do within a week or 2 weeks? And this is something that's developed over time to where you can at least come up with an idea of how long a project will take based on the velocity of the stories that you're completing. Throughput kind of falls in that same category. Relative sizing. I worked on an Agile project that took me 8 weeks to complete. I have another project that's about the same, except maybe a little bit bigger. Maybe it'll take me 10 weeks on this. That would be more relative sizing. And then estimating story points. If we went back to that backlog, there are story points in that backlog. How long does it take to do a story point? And based on how long those story points are, we can do some estimating on those as well to help us figure out how long it will take us to do a future iteration that's very similar to the one we just finished. Agile estimating is very, very subjective, but it can be narrowed down over a period of time to some fairly accurate estimating. Product vision, we talked about that. Product vision is based on a vision of the desired objectives of the project and how it aligns with the goals. The team is always the steward of this vision, and it talks about then what is included in that product or that solution description. The vision statement drives the project. What does it look like? What does form look like? Here's an approach to it. You have a product vision, project title. We're developing this product to respond to the following needs. This product responds to those needs by providing the following. Customers will buy this product because. That goes right back in alignment with what we looked at earlier. We have the product backlog. You have a product backlog and you have iteration backlogs. The product backlog would be the higher level backlog. That would be what the product is going to be based on the vision, the product vision. Underneath the product backlog, you're going to have iteration backlogs that will support certain characteristics associated with the product backlog. This is a product backlog. Iteration backlog would fall into that same category, look just the same. And it starts off with certainly what is your ID, what is your summary description, what is the priority, what is the story that substantiates this need, and then what is the status. Release plan. We do a release plan. A release plan tells us when certain iterations or sprints will be released to the customer. And you can notice here that I have different iterations across the top, and I have different teams going down the column. There is a level of planning that is done within Agile, even though it is minimal planning. We have Agile practices. These guys that got together back in 2001, I don't know how many of these practices were available then, but there were some evolving. And what they did was they pulled together the commonalities of each one of these practices into the manifesto and into the principles of Agile project management. Here I have listed three focal methods, and one of them is called Kanban. Most of you are probably familiar with a Kanban board. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here. It's derived from lean production systems that shows work in stages. That's what a Kanban board does for us. Lean. Kanban and lean, neither one are specifically Agile, but they've been adapted to Agile in both cases. And then we have Scrum. Scrum is an approach all of its own. It's probably one of the most well-known. That along with FDD probably. But practices, roles, events, artifacts, and rules designed to guide the team in executing the project. PMI has, over the past few years, developed what's called Disciplined Agile. Disciplined Agile is not an approach. It is not an approach, but it is a toolkit. It draws from all of the other different concepts out there, such as Scrum, Kanban, FDD, whatever's out there. In other words, coming out of a disciplined Agile approach would be what's called a way of working. Way of working. I might pull something from Scrum, I might pull something else from Lean, something else from Kanban, something else from XP, and I pull those together for the needs of, number one, the organization. What does my organization need as far as an Agile approach goes? And then number two would be the project. What does my project need with regards to an Agile approach? Then there's several other methods, and this is only a few of them. There's a ton of different Agile methods out there. Here is a Scrum flowchart, and I'm going to have to speed up here. But basically, you have your vision statement, then that goes into the product backlog. Then you have your release planning meeting, and you have, of course, your product vision meeting. Then you have your sprints, your iterations. 1 to 6, 1 to 8 weeks long. There's no, I think Scrum specifies 1 to 6. You have your sprint planning meeting here. You execute the backlogs, the sprint backlogs. That would be your iteration backlogs. You execute those. Then there's a deliverable output from that. That deliverable is accepted by the customer during the sprint review meeting. You hold that. Then you do a retrospective, lessons learned. What can I learn from this sprint that I can use in other sprints? And then it circles right back around, and those lessons we learned, and then it just keeps flowing through. That would be then your Scrum flow chart. Kanban, of course, this is just a picture of Kanban, and then we have a picture of FDD, feature-driven development. And then there are many others, as we talked about earlier. Here is the Agile release plan. Agile release plan. This is a pretty important screenshot here. And what this tells us is the product vision drives product roadmap, and the product roadmap drives the release plan. Notice, we have a release. That release includes these iterations. Iteration 0 is your planning iteration. That's where you plan the iteration at. And it may be minor, but there's a planning session that takes place there. But look at this. Iteration 1 has other iterations in it, such as features. A feature would be a user story that's in the backlog. You would plan out that feature story, and it would have tasks in it, and we would estimate how long it takes to complete that task. That would be the iteration plan. So you would have the features. Each one of these would have their own list of tasks associated with them, and each iteration would have its own set of features associated with it. And everything is based on a user story. That is a release plan. I can at least project when a certain feature will be released to the customer, in what iteration it will be released to them, and that would give them information that perhaps they need. That is the release plan. I talked about a burn up, burn down chart. Here's a burn up chart. It shows the story points that have been completed. I have my plan here, and then this would be the actual number that have been completed. That shows the story points that have been done. Then the burn down chart shows the story points remaining. Again, here's my plan, and here is the story points that are remaining. That's a method of measurement that we use in Agile. You're very limited in Agile as to the measurements and reporting. Then we talked about the information radiator. Information radiator posted in a very visible place. It has things like burn down charts, burn up charts, velocity charts, cycle time charts, and other information that you might have available. It's highly visible location, high traffic. It can be electronic, it can be a bulletin board, whiteboard, whatever you choose for your information radiator. We're going to wrap up here, and I want to summarize this just a little bit. If we look at Agile and Waterfall, of course, we know that we define the requirements, then we design it, then we develop it, then we test it, then we deploy it, and then we maintain it. That's the waterfall approach. Agile, we have the requirements. Then we design, we develop, we test, deploy, and we're doing this continuously throughout the life of the project, and their scope will be varying as we go through this. Another way to explain this is, if I have a target that I'm shooting for, a target has rings in it, and it has a bullseye in it. In a predictive or traditional waterfall approach, that bullseye is well defined. I know where I'm going. But in an Agile environment, it's blurred. I cannot see that target. But as I move into the Agile project, then that target will become more clearly identified until we have met the definition of done. Here's another way to look at it. This is typically associated with traditional projects where we use progressive elaboration, but I just want you to consider how this relates to Agile. In a traditional type of environment with progressive elaboration, we have a reason for the project. We have the business documents. We initiate the project. We collect requirements. We identify stakeholders. We have a project charter. But then we start planning that project. We start planning it through progressive elaboration. Once we start planning it, we're going to start executing that project. We're planning and we're executing, and at the same time we're planning and executing, we're going to start monitoring and controlling that project, making sure that the work we're doing is being done in accordance with the plan. And this will continue on for the life of the project. When the deliverable has been accepted, then we will close the project, and then we will transfer the deliverable to the end user. We'll also file away all the records and everything in our organizational repository. Some similarity there to Agile. Not as much documentation in Agile as we have in a traditional environment, but there are some similarities there. Using this term in predictive, we call progressive elaboration. Where are we going to with this? We start off, we have the 10 by 5 by 49, 6th edition of the PMBOK guide. Then we take that in reality, in real life, we take that 10 by 5 by 49 and we put it into a practical flow that we will execute those processes within. That's going to be tailored to our organizational needs, and it should be flexible enough to accommodate our individual project needs. But let's add in one other factor: Agile. In a hybrid project, we are going to mesh together the traditional approach with the Agile approach. Sometimes I may have a project that is more predictive, traditional, than it is Agile, but it's supplemented with Agile. Sometimes I may have an Agile project that might be supplemented with some traditional types of projects. It just depends. What am I talking about here? Overall, I'm talking about wow. Wow. You can say, wow, what a mess we have here, right? But I'm talking about wow. Wow is the way of working. That is our objective. That should always be our objective as a project manager, is to identify our way of working. How are we going to do our projects? It should always be developed based on the needs of the organization, and it should be flexible enough that it can be used certainly for individual projects.